Admiral Jin sat in the command center of Earth's orbital defense station, watching the endless stream of data flowing across the monitors. It was just another quiet Tuesday until Communications Officer Sue burst through the doors, her face pale with worry. "Admiral, you need to hear this," Sue said, her voice shaking slightly. She handed him a translation device. "We picked up something on the deep space channels. It's not good." Jin put on the headset and listened. What he heard made his blood run cold. The voice belonged to someone desperate, speaking in a language the computers barely recognized. But the translation was clear enough. "Please, anyone who can hear this message. Our worlds are dying. The Devourers have come to our system. They eat everything. Our ships, our cities, our people. We are the Villani, and we have nowhere left to run." The message repeated over and over, growing weaker each time. Jin could hear explosions and screaming in the background. These weren't soldiers calling for backup. These were families begging for their lives. "How long have we been receiving this?" Jin asked. 3 days, sir? It's coming from the Villani system, about 40 light years from here. The signal is getting weaker." Jin walked to the main display and pulled up the star charts. The Villani system showed as a small cluster of peaceful worlds. According to their files, the Villani were farmers and artists, not warriors. They had no military to speak of. "Have we contacted the Galactic Council?" Jin asked. Communications Officer Min stepped forward, looking frustrated. "Yes, sir. They received the same transmissions. The Council held an emergency meeting yesterday, and they voted not to intervene. They say the Devourers are too dangerous. The Council believes any rescue mission would only result in more casualties." Jin felt anger building in his chest. He had served in 3 wars and seen good people die, but he had never abandoned civilians who needed help. The idea of leaving an entire species to die while politicians debated safety made him sick. "Sir," Sue said quietly, "there's more." It detected at least 50 refugee ships trying to escape the system. Most of them went dark before reaching the outer planets. Jin stared at the star chart for a long moment. The Villani system was far from Earth, beyond the reach of most human vessels. Getting there would require everything they had. And there was no guarantee they could fight whatever these Devourers were, but that didn't matter. Jin had joined the military to protect people, not to watch them die from a safe distance. "Me Fleet Command," Jin said firmly. "I want every available ship commander on a secure channel in 10 minutes. "Sir, the Council has already decided not to help," Min said carefully. Jin turned to face his officers, his decision made. "The Council represents a lot of species. They don't represent Earth. We've never abandoned people who needed our help, and we're not starting now." The room fell silent as everyone realized what their admiral was planning. They were going to war without permission, against an unknown enemy, to save people they had never met, and somehow that felt exactly right. The news spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected, within hours of Admiral Jin's announcement. Every species with access to interstellar communication knew about the human decision. The reactions were immediate and predictable. "They're insane," muttered Ambassador Krell of the Zephyrian Empire, watching the emergency council session. No rational species would fly directly into extinction. But on Earth, rationality wasn't the driving force. Captain Rhee stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching as volunteer ships arrived from every corner of human space. There was the carrier Sol Pride from the Korean fleet, the heavy cruiser New Lagos from the African Union, dozens of smaller vessels from colonies that most people had never heard of. "Sir, we have 43 ships confirmed and ready," reported Navigation Officer Park. "That's everything we can get space-worthy in the next 6 hours." Er nodded, feeling the weight of command. He had been chosen to lead the flagship not because he was the most senior officer, but because Jin trusted him to make the hard choices when they mattered most. Down in the Marine Bay, Commander Ho was addressing 3,000 volunteers. These weren't just soldiers, were teachers, engineers, farmers, and shopkeepers who had dropped everything when the call went out. Ho himself had been on leave visiting his sister's family when the message reached him. I won't lie to you, Ho told his troops. We don't know what we're flying into. The Villani descriptions of these devourers sound like nothing we've faced before. Some of you might not make it home. A young Marine named Kim raised her hand. Sir, what if we can't save them? Ho was quiet for a moment. Then at least they'll know that someone tried. That has to count for something. In the science lab, Dr. Mi was surrounded by holographic displays showing every piece of data they had collected about the enemy. It wasn't much. Crystalline ships that seemed to grow rather than being built. Energy weapons that adapted to whatever they hit. Most disturbing of all, reports that the Devourers seemed to learn from every battle. Doctor, said her assistant technician, the computers keep flagging inconsistencies in the Villani reports. Sometimes the creatures use energy weapons. Sometimes they ram ships physically. Their tactics don't seem to follow any pattern. Frowned, studying the data again. Maybe that's exactly the point. What if they change their approach based on what works best against each enemy? Across the galaxy, other species watch the human fleet prepare to depart with a mixture of horror and fascination. The graceful Altarians called it beautiful madness. The logical Corvin Republic simply marked the Terran system for future archaeological study, but among the younger members of various species, something else was happening. Applications to join human crews began flooding Earth's communication networks. Most were rejected due to time constraints. But the message was clear. Admiral Jin's final transmission to the Galactic Council was brief. We go where others will. Not, we do what others cannot. History will judge whether we were heroes or fools. But at least it will not say we stood by and did nothing. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's hopes toward an unknown fate, 2 weeks into their journey. The human fleet was running silent through deep space when sensor operator Lee detected something unexpected on the long-range scanners. We're picking up multiple contacts ahead. They're moving slowly and appear to be damaged. Captain Ree moved to the main display, studying the readings. The ships were unlike anything in the human database. They looked organic, almost grown rather than built, with smooth curves and no visible weapons systems. Get Captain So on the come. Reordered. We need his translation skills. Captain So had joined the mission specifically because of his gift for languages. He'd learned 12 alien dialects during his diplomatic service and had a natural talent for picking up new ones. Quickly, when the first transmission came through, it was weak and filled with static. This is refugee vessel ... gentle current.
Oh.
Please identify. So worked with the ship's computer for several minutes, cross-referencing the sounds with known linguistic patterns. Finally, he looked up with excitement. I think I've got it, sir. They're speaking an evolved form of old galactic standard, but with musical tones that carry meaning. The next transmission was clearer, as So adjusted the communication array.
What?
They heard made the entire bridge fall silent. Unknown ships, we are Villani survivors, fleeing the destruction of our homeworld. We mean no harm. We have families aboard, including younglings. Please do not attack us. Captain Ree took the communicator. Personally, Villani vessels, this is Captain Ree of the Earth's Defense Fleet. We are here to help. We received your distress calls. The silence that followed lasted so long that Ree wondered if the transmission had failed. Then came a voice filled with disbelief. You came to help us, but the Great Council refused. Why would strangers risk their lives for people they have never met? Meanwhile, Engineer Wu was having problems of his own. The weapon systems designed to fight human enemies seemed completely wrong for what they were about to face. Based on the refugee reports, the Devourers had some kind of adaptive armor that could deflect energy weapons after being hit once. We need to think differently, Wu told his engineering team. If energy weapons become useless, what about kinetic? Rounds? Old-fashioned bullets and missiles? His assistant technician Nam looked skeptical. Sir, kinetic weapons went out of style 200 years ago.
Yes.
They're too slow and inaccurate for space combat. Maybe that's exactly why they'll work, Wu replied, already sketching modifications on his tablet. If these creatures adapt to whatever hits them, we need to hit them with things they've never seen before. As the human fleet approached the refugee convoy, Captain, so continued his conversations with the Volani survivors. Their stories were heartbreaking. Entire cities consumed in minutes. Defense fleets destroyed before they could fire a shot. Families torn apart as escape pods. Scattered in all directions. "Your people are brave beyond understanding," said Healer Volani, speaking for the refugees. "We thought all hope was lost. The galaxy had abandoned us to die." Captain Ree's response was simple but firm. "The galaxy might have given up, but humans don't abandon people who need help. That's just who we are." When the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Volani system, the sight that greeted them was unlike anything they had prepared for. Where the star charts showed 3 beautiful garden worlds, only one remained intact. The other 2 were gone, replaced by floating debris and massive crystalline structures that pulsed with an eerie blue light. "Dear God," whispered Navigator Park, staring at the main screen. "What happened to the planets?" Commander Tay was already suiting up for his reconnaissance mission when the answer became clear. Through the long-range cameras, they watched as thousands of smaller crystalline entities swarmed around the remaining moon of the 3rd planet. The creatures moved like insects, but each one was the size of a city bus. They were literally eating the moon, breaking it apart piece by piece. "Sir, you need to see this," called Sensor Operator Lee. "I'm detecting massive energy readings from those crystal formations. They're not ships. They're some kind of processing facilities." Tay launched his stealth fighter with 2 wingmen, flying closer to get a better look. What he saw made his blood run cold. The crystalline entities weren't just destroying the Volani worlds. They were harvesting them, turning rock and metal into more of themselves. "Base, this is Recon 1, Tay reported, his voice tight with control. "The creatures are using the planetary material to build more ships. Every chunk of rock they consume becomes part of their fleet." Back on the flagship, scientist Da was analyzing the reconnaissance footage with growing alarm. The crystalline armor on the creatures wasn't just protective, it was alive, constantly shifting and changing as it grew. Captain Da called out, "I need to speak with the Volani survivors immediately. There's something about these creatures that doesn't make sense." When Healer Volani appeared on the communication screen, her large eyes were filled with sadness. "You have seen them now, haven't you? The ones who devour worlds? How do they fight? Which directly? What weapons do they use?" "That is the horror of it," Volani replied. "They use whatever works best against their enemy. When we fired energy weapons, they developed shields. When we used kinetic rounds, they grew thicker armor. When we tried ramming attacks, they became more agile." Commander Ho, listening from the Marine Bay, felt his stomach drop. "You're saying they adapt to every attack?" "Worse than that," Volani continued. "They learn instantly. Hit one with a laser, and within seconds, every creature in their fleet becomes immune to that exact type of laser. Our defense fleet lasted less than an hour before our weapons became completely useless." Dr. Mee, who had been studying the data, looked up with concern. "How many of them are there?" "When they first arrived, we counted perhaps 100 ships," Volani said quietly. "Now, after consuming 2 of our worlds, there are thousands. And they grow stronger with every planet they devour."
Ow.
The bridge fell silent as the full scope of their challenge became clear. They weren't just facing an enemy fleet. They were facing a force that could learn from every battle and grow stronger from every victory. Dr. Mee hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her small laboratory aboard the flagship was covered with holographic displays showing battle footage from the Volani defense fleet. She had watched the same sequences dozens of times, looking for any weakness in the crystalline creatures. "Has to be something," she muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. "No, organism is perfect." Her breakthrough came when she noticed something odd in the time stamps. When the Volani had attacked the Devourers with plasma cannons, it took exactly 4.7 seconds for every single creature to develop immunity. When they switched to particle beams, again 4.7 seconds. Even when they tried completely different tactics, the response time was always the same. "They're connected," Mee said aloud, suddenly understanding. "It's not individual learning. They're all part of one mind." She called an emergency meeting in the war room. Captain Ree, Commander Ho, and the senior staff gathered around the holographic display as Mi explained her discovery. The Devourers aren't just coordinated. They're literally sharing one consciousness. When one creature learns something, they all learn it instantly. That's why their adaptation time is so consistent. Commander Ho looked grim, so we can't surprise them. Whatever we hit them with, they'll all be ready for it in 5 seconds. That's what I thought too, Mi said. But then Tactical Officer Jay found something interesting. Jay stood up, looking nervous about addressing the senior officers. Well, sir, I was studying human battle records from our own wars. We've never been very good at following patterns. What do you mean? Captain Ree asked. Look at our military history, Jay continued, gaining confidence. We use whatever works, even if it doesn't make sense. Sometimes we charge with bayonets. Sometimes we use nuclear weapons. Sometimes we just ram things with our ships. There's no logic to it. Dr. Mi nodded excitedly. That's exactly the point. The Devourers learn by recognizing patterns. But what if we don't follow any patterns? Engineer Wu leaned forward. You mean use random tactics? Not random, Mi corrected. Chaotic. Every ship doing something completely different. No. Every attack being unique. If they can't predict what we're going to do, they can't adapt to stop us. Commander Tay raised his hand. But wouldn't that make us less effective? Coordinated attacks are stronger than scattered ones. Usually, yes, admitted Mi. But we're not fighting a usual enemy. We're fighting a computer that expects logical behavior. What if we give it something it can't process? The room was quiet as everyone considered the implications. Captain Ree finally spoke. So you're saying our biggest weakness as a military force might actually be our greatest strength against these things? Exactly, Mi replied. Humans are unpredictable, stubborn, and we never do things the same way twice. Against any normal enemy. That's a problem. Against a hive mind that learns from patterns. It might be the only advantage we have. The meeting ended with everyone understanding their new strategy. Organized chaos. It sounded crazy enough to work. Admiral Jin stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching as the human fleet spread out in what looked like complete disorder. To any military observer, it would appear that the humans had lost their minds. Ships were moving in random directions. Weapons were charging at different intervals. And there was no visible coordination between units. All ships, remember the plan, Jin announced over the fleet-wide communication. No patterns, no predictability, no logic. Make it up as you go. Captain Ree was the first to engage. Instead of the long-range bombardment that every civilized species preferred, he aimed his heavy cruiser directly at the largest Devourer ship and pushed the engines to maximum power. Sir, are you sure about this? Asked his helmsman, watching the collision course with obvious concern. Absolutely not, Ree replied with a grin. That's exactly the point. The crystalline creatures had never seen anything like it. Of years, they had faced logical enemies who used optimal tactics and predictable strategies. They tried to adapt to the ramming attack, strengthening their hulls and adjusting their formations. But Ree pulled back at the last second, launched a barrage of old-fashioned explosive missiles, then immediately switched to electromagnetic pulse weapons. The Devourer's adaptation protocols struggled to keep up. Their systems were designed to counter one type of attack, but Ree was using 3 different methods within 10 seconds. Meanwhile, Commander Ho was trying something even more unprecedented. His marine assault ships latched onto the crystalline vessels and began cutting through their hulls. With industrial mining equipment? Sir, we're inside one of their ships, reported Sergeant Kim over the radio, and it's really weird in here. There are no crew members, no control rooms, nothing. It's like the whole ship is one big organism. Ho himself was leading a boarding party on another vessel, using welding torches and explosive charges to damage the creatures from the inside. The Devourers had no defense protocols for internal attacks because no species had ever been crazy enough to board their ships. Engineer Yoon was having the time of his life. His ship was equipped with every type of weapon the human fleet could carry. He started with nuclear missiles, then switched to kinetic railguns, followed by focused laser arrays, then back to conventional explosives. This is like having a toolbox, full of hammers, and getting to use every single one, Jan told his weapons crew. Fire everything we have, but never the same thing twice in a row. The effect on the Devourers was immediate and visible. The crystalline ships began moving erratically, their formations breaking apart as they tried to adapt. Two threats that kept changing faster than their systems could process. For the first time in millennia, the hive mind experienced something it had never felt before: confusion. Its adaptation protocols were designed for logical progression, not for enemies who deliberately did the wrong thing for the right reasons. Their response time is increasing, reported Dr. Me with excitement. Instead of 4.7 seconds there, taking almost 30 seconds to adapt to each new attack. Admiral Jin smiled grimly. Then we're finally fighting on our terms. The Devourer hive mind had never experienced failure before. For millions of years it had consumed civilizations across the galaxy with perfect efficiency. But these humans were breaking every rule of warfare. Something had to be done. Deep within the consumed planets, massive crystalline structures began to shift and grow. What emerged from the planetary debris were ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each dreadnought was the size of a small city, bristling with weapons that had been harvested from 1,000 different worlds. "Sir, you need to see this," called Sensor Operator Lee, his voice tight with fear. "We're detecting 12 massive contacts rising from the debris fields. Each one is reading as large as our entire capital city." Admiral Jin studied the readings and felt his heart sink. The human fleet had 43 ships. The enemy now had thousands of smaller vessels, plus these 12 giants. The math was simple and terrifying. Captain Key was already launching his fighter squadrons when the dreadnoughts opened fire. Beams of energy that could crack planets swept through space, forcing the human ships to scatter like leaves in a storm. "All fighters forget formation flying," Key commanded over the radio. "Fly like you're avoiding traffic in downtown Seoul during rush hour. No patterns, no coordination, just stay alive." His pilots responded with the kind of chaotic flying that would have gotten them court-martialed in peacetime. Fighter pilot Lim was diving under a dreadnought's weapon array, then suddenly pulling up to attack its sensor clusters. Pilot Bay was flying backward while shooting, something that violated every rule in the tactical manual. The massive ships tried to track the human fighters, but their targeting systems couldn't predict movements that didn't follow any logical pattern. Weapons that could destroy battleships were missing tiny fighters, because the pilots were doing exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right moment. Dr. Na was coordinating the capital ship's defenses from the flagship's tactical center. She had discovered that the Devourer's weapons used a specific frequency pattern, so she kept changing the human shield frequencies every few seconds. "Rotate shield harmonics to random settings," she ordered the fleet. "Don't give them time to find our frequency." The battle was pure chaos. Engineer Yoon's ship was ramming a dreadnought's weapon turret while simultaneously launching nuclear missiles at another target. Commander Ho had somehow managed to board one of the massive ships and was setting explosive charges in what looked like a nerve center, despite being outnumbered. 1,000 to 1, the human fleet was holding its ground. The Devourer's perfect adaptation system was breaking down under the strain of trying to counter tactics that changed every few seconds. "Their firing patterns are becoming erratic," reported Dr. Me. "The hive mind is struggling to process our behavior." But everyone knew this couldn't last forever. The human ships were taking damage, and there were limits to how long chaos could overcome overwhelming numbers. "Sir," called Communications Officer Su, "we're receiving surrender demands from the enemy." Admiral Jin almost laughed. "Tell them humans don't know how to surrender. We only know how to fight harder." The human fleet was running out of options. Half their ships were badly damaged, ammunition was running low, and the massive Devourer dreadnoughts kept coming. Dr. Me had been studying the enemy formation for hours when she noticed something crucial. "Admiral, I think I found their weak point," she called out urgently. "That largest structure in the center isn't just another ship. All the communication signals are flowing through it. I think it's their command center," Admiral Jin studied. The tactical display structure Me was pointing to was enormous. Easily 10 times larger than their biggest ship, was surrounded by hundreds of smaller vessels, and protected by energy shields that had deflected every attack so far. "Even if you're right, how do we get through those defenses?" asked Captain Ree. Jin was quiet for a long moment, running calculations in his head. Then he activated the fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Admiral Jin. I'm going to give you an order that goes against everything we've been taught about military strategy. I want every ship to overload their reactor cores and prepare for a coordinated ramming attack on the central structure. The communication channel fell silent. Everyone understood what he was asking. Overloading a reactor core was a one-way trip. There would be no survivors. Captain Ree was the first to respond. Sir, requesting permission to lead the attack formation? Permission granted, Jin replied, his voice heavy with emotion. Commander? A, who had been fighting in the outer system, immediately changed course toward the center. Count me in, Admiral. My ship's already taken too much damage to make it home anyway. Pilot U, flying one of the few remaining fighters, joined the formation. My fighter doesn't have a reactor big enough to make a difference, but I can clear a path through their defensive screen. One by one, every remaining human ship confirmed their participation. Engineers began overriding safety systems while pilots plotted intercept courses. The Villani refugees, watching from a safe distance, could hardly believe what they were seeing. They're all going to die for us, whispered Healer Villani. Every single one of them. The final charge began with Pilot U diving ahead to confuse the enemy targeting systems. His tiny fighter danced between energy beams that could have vaporized entire cities, drawing fire away from the larger ships. Captain Ree's cruiser led the main formation, its overloaded reactor already beginning to glow with dangerous energy. Behind him, Commander A and 30 other ships followed in perfect formation, something the chaotic humans had never managed. Before, the Devourers tried to adapt, but there was no defense against an enemy willing to destroy themselves to win. The coordinated impact of 32 exploding reactor cores created a chain reaction that tore through the hive mind's central consciousness like lightning on the aftermath. As the massive structure collapsed in on itself, something unprecedented happened. Every Devourer ship in the system simply stopped moving. Without their guiding intelligence, they became nothing more than floating crystals. The galaxy's most feared predator had been defeated by beings who chose sacrifice over survival. 3 months after the Battle of Villani, the story had spread to every corner of the galaxy, not through official reports or government announcements, but through the words of survivors who had witnessed something they never thought possible. Healer Villani stood before the Galactic Council, her voice carrying. Across the Great Assembly Hall, they came when no one else would. 43 ships against thousands. They knew they would die, and they came anyway. The council chambers, normally filled with political debate and careful diplomacy, were completely silent. Representatives from hundreds of worlds listened as Villani described the final moments of the human fleet. Admiral Jin could have retreated. Captain Ree could have saved his crew. They all could have chosen to live. Instead, they chose to save people they had never met from a world they had never seen. Ambassador Krell of the Zephyrian Empire, who had called the humans insane just months earlier, stood up slowly. I'd propose that we establish a new protocol. Let it be known throughout the galaxy that no distress call will go unanswered. We shall call it the Jin Protocol, in honor of those who showed us what courage truly means. The vote was unanimous. Back on Earth, the changes were immediate and overwhelming. Ships from dozens of species arrived daily, carrying gifts of technology, art, and friendship. The Corvin Republic, known for their logic and cold calculation, sent medical equipment that could extend human life by centuries. The graceful Altarians shared their knowledge of faster-than-light travel, but perhaps the most meaningful gesture came from the survivors themselves. The remaining Villani population had voted to relocate their entire civilization to a system near Earth. We want to be close to the people who saved us, Villani explained to the human ambassador. Your children should know what their parents died for. The memorials began appearing within weeks. On the Corvon homeworld, a crystal monument listed the names of every human who died in the battle. The Altarians composed songs that would be sung for generations. Even the warlike Draxi Empire, who respected only strength, erected statues of the human ships in their capital city, Dr. Me. One of the few survivors who had been on a research vessel during the final battle returned to Earth to find herself a celebrity. She used her newfound influence to establish the Admiral Jin Academy, where young humans would learn not just military strategy, but the values that had made their species unique. "We didn't win because we were stronger," she told the first class of cadets. "We won because we cared more than anyone thought possible." The galaxy had learned something important from humanity's sacrifice. Species that had spent centuries focused on their own survival began looking outward, wondering who else might need help. Rescue fleets became common, often led by human advisors who taught alien crews the art of organized chaos. Years later, when historians wrote about the turning point in galactic civilization, they would mark it as the day a small fleet from an unknown world decided that some things were worth dying for. The age of indifference had ended, replaced by something. Humans had brought to the stars the simple idea that heroes were just ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things.